Child of Stendar, I will be watching you, always. If even a spot of corruption touches your soul, the gates to my realm will open wide for you.
One of my favorite mods of all time is Vigilant, a massive 4-act long quest mod in which you join the Vigilant of Stendar and try to stamp out Daedra worship across Skyrim. And what starts as a simple series of quests quickly evolves, with you having to thwart the corrupted members within your own order, travel deep below Windhelm to face off against Lamai Bal, the first vampire, and survive a haunted manor overcome by Molag Bal's dark influence, all while trying to break the curse that has befallen it, with all of this culminating in your own damnation, as you're sent to Cold Harbor, Molag Bal's own plane of oblivion. The mod draws a lot of inspiration from Dark Souls, and can be seen most notably during this final act, in the way in which the levels are designed and bosses are encountered. Cold Harbor serves as a twisted and demented version of Cyrodiil's Imperial City, reliving the memories of fallen heroes and villains of Elder Scrolls lore, as you try to make your way to the center of the city, with multiple endings based on your choices, and eventually freeing yourself from oblivion and returning home to Skyrim. But that's not where it all ends. Vigilant is in fact only the first mod in an almost completed trilogy, with each of these 3 mods having their own standalone story, but they will all come together in the end of the 3rd and final one. The mod author VICN has been working on the trilogy for years now, and has gone back to make changes to Vigilant many times, in order to have things line up for how everything will eventually connect. When the trilogy is truly fully finished, we'll have Vigilant as Act 1, Glenmoril as Act 2, and Unslad as Act 3. With Unslad doing a deep dive into even more esoteric Elder Scrolls lore, exploring more of our destiny as Dragonborn, and allowing us to travel into the future. Right now, Vigilant is the only fully finished mod, with Glenmoril's final chapter still being a work in progress, and Unslad being nearly complete, but may need some slight updates after Glenmoril is done. Today, I wanted to talk a bit about the second mod in the series, Glenmoril. While Vigilant was inspired by Dark Souls, Glenmoril was inspired by another of FromSoft's games, Bloodborne. And since it feels like we're never getting a Bloodborne remaster or PC port, I guess this is the next best thing. As the name might imply, the mod revolves around you joining a group of witch hunters in Skyrim. I've had a lot of people ask why I haven't done a Skyrim Saturday playthrough for Glenmoril and for Unslad yet, and the reason is due to waiting on the completed versions, as well as the voiced English translations. For anyone who watched my Vigilant playthrough a few years back, you'll know that I was using the fully voiced English version, which is done by a separate team, as VICN creates the mods in his native Japanese, but does provide a basic machine translation into English text. The team behind the full English translation and voiced version is waiting on the full releases so that they're not constantly trying to get the voice actors back for each and every work in progress update. In the meantime, they are still providing full written English translations, which are much more cohesive than the original Google Translate version. And while I could try and play the mods in full now for videos, and just voice every character myself, I just don't think it would make for as interesting of a video series experience. One of the things that I loved about Vigilant was getting to play it with that fully voiced experience, which really helped me connect to the characters so much more. So today's video isn't the start of a full playthrough, but instead think of it as a quick look at a mod that I'm really looking forward to. There will be some slight spoilers for the first 2 acts of the mod, just in case you're looking to go into the mod completely blind. The story starts off as a more slice-of-life style tutorial, helping an orphan in Falkreath, named Lalanoa, return to her home, with her believing that her parents will return one day. One of the local guards, named Brant, implies that her parents aren't coming back, and he begrudgingly assists you in looking after her, keeping her out of the way when a slaver makes his way to the Hold's capital. Even during this first act, the Radiant quest system opens up, with the ability to complete small miscellaneous quests to gain points for the mod's 2 new player stats, Humanity and Beasthood. Humanity is similar to how Vigilant had a karma stat, which helped to determine which endings would be available to you. After some slower back and forth between the child Lalinoa and the guard Brant, you finally start monster hunting, starting with a nearby ghoul den. Some of the darker moments start to come out with these dens, as well as some mentions of cursed beasts who were once under the influence of Hircine. It isn't until Act 2 that you join the Witch Hunters and get your first mention of the Glenmoril Coven, who serve as the hunter's main target. Like Vigilant, Glenmoril focuses heavily on cinematic moments and set pieces, making you feel like you're really part of this play that's taking place before you. The moment in which you join the Hunters has some really great build-up, and even reminds me quite a bit of Bloodborne's introduction. And this is when the Bloodborne inspiration becomes much more apparent, including weapons and armor that are very similar, if not near identical copies of the ones from the PlayStation exclusive. One of the new weapon types added in the mod are firearms, including blunderbusses, pistols, and rifles. You'll recognize new creature and monster types from both Bloodborne and Witcher 3, with some of the Witcher ones appearing early in Chapter 1, with both the rock troll and the ghouls. And obviously there's going to be some creative liberty and license taken with these mods. Firearms aren't strictly canon in the Elder Scrolls. Gunpowder and shipside cannons have been seen and mentioned, but even then, not since the Elder Scrolls Redguard over 20 years ago. It comes down to where you, as the player, draw the line on immersion and whatnot. For me, I really enjoy VICN's mods, and while the firearms might not be strictly canon or completely lore-friendly, I can appreciate the tone and setting that they help to bring to the mod. The same could also be said about the Bloodborne monsters being used, or the Witcher ones, but for me, it all works well. If anything, it was kinda funny, because I played Skyrim's Vigilant before I ever played Dark Souls. So by the time that I finally went and played it, I would think to myself, oh, that's not Smaug, that's Mara. And instead, I spent most of my Dark Souls playthrough associating these bosses with their counterparts from the Skyrim mod. The bit of Glenmoril that I played for today's video was really engrossing, and it had me captivated from the get-go. The slower, more back-and-forth story in the beginning of helping Lalinoa kept me invested, and if anything, it caught my attention a lot faster than the starting chapter of Vigilant, which also goes to show how much VICN has learned since his earliest modding days. I already feel really invested in these characters, in the story, and wanting to know where it goes. If anything, I really liked that we didn't join the Hunters until the second act. Not knowing when we might see them kept me on edge throughout Act 1. The slightlier happy and more slice-of-life nature of the first act gave me time to become attached to Lalinoa, which, if anything, it makes me wonder just how much VICN plans to hurt me by killing her, cursing her, or having her suffer some other incredibly cruel fate. It's worth noting that most characters in his mods don't get happy endings. Sometimes you do, but even then it depends on which ending you get. One thing to note is that VICN's work draws very heavily upon established Elder Scrolls lore, but it also takes its own liberties and puts its own spins on them. This can be seen not just in regards to the Dark Souls enemies and gear in Vigilant or the Bloodborne stuff in Glenmoril, but also just in how he retells some stories from within the Elder Scrolls universe. In some ways, VICN's interpretation of the lore almost feels like that of writing his own mythological stories. All of his mods have a much darker tone, so they might not be for everyone, but I think they excel at creating these darker stories and characters while not feeling forced, edgy, or overdone. For me, it's a really great balance of acknowledging some of the darker lore in the Elder Scrolls that we might not always get to see ourselves in the games, but instead are only able to read about in the lore books. But with all this said, you might be wondering if Glenmoril is worth playing right now. And I would say it's something you might want to check out now just to get a feel for it, but just keep in mind that you won't be able to complete the mod in its current state. However, if you do start playing it now, you should be able to update your copy of the mod and finish a full playthrough when VICN uploads the final version. Even without voice acting, the story really grabbed me, and I wound up playing a bit longer than I expected in order to make this video. I actually got to a point where I realized, okay, I should probably stop playing now, before I really get too far in this. But I don't feel like this will detract from my experience when I finally play the voiced version upon its release. If anything, I think I'll be able to enjoy it even more, getting that truly polished, finished version after having already enjoyed this work-in-progress build. I would say that Glenmoril, and getting to play the full VICN trilogy, is one of my most anticipated Skyrim mod experiences right now. And if you haven't already played Vigilant for yourself, make sure to check it out, or you could always watch my video series on it. And despite the more obvious influence of From Software's games, VICN's mods are still balanced around Skyrim's vanilla combat. Yes, you can absolutely get mods to change up the combat, difficulty, and so on, to really make it feel and play like a Soulsborne experience. But on its own, out of the box, Vigilant and the other mods in the series can be played very easily on an otherwise vanilla save game. The only real requirements for these mods in the end are SKSC, SkyUI, and Fusrodo's silent voice. In addition to VICN's hard work, the contributions from Alar and the Skyrim Voice Alliance cannot be understated. Alar's understanding of the stories, their tone, and even trying to help others understand the intricacies of the lore is really incredible. I've played through Vigilant maybe 3 or so times at this point, and there's still things that I missed or didn't completely understand. And Alar was always happy to explain what he could on the Skyrim Mod subreddit. I recently replayed Vigilant in order to get ready for Glenmoril, so that I would have a save file and character where I could go through all 3 mods. And while we don't have a release date or timeline lined up for the full release of Glenmoril, I wouldn't be surprised if we saw it sometime this year, or maybe next. And from there, we'll have to see how many updates there would be to Unslad and Vigilant, and when Alar and the Skyrim Voice Alliance would be able to start recording lines for the fully voiced versions. As always, thank you for watching. If you'd like to support the channel, check out the Patreon or the YouTube memberships, both of which get access to the Discord server. YouTube members also get access to the channel emotes, which can be used in the comments below. And make sure to check out the streams at twitch.tv/0periodproductions. I'll see you guys next time. Bye bye.